Weapons there were, of unimaginable power.
It traces back to the ancients.
You mean the Jedi?
No, older.
Hey, welcome back to Screen Crush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in The Bad Batch, Episode 5. This episode was a lot of fun, and I think that it has a major Easter egg that ties into the ancient Sith War, the Knights of the Old Republic, and the culmination of the Skywalker saga. So is it me, or is newer Star Wars getting nostalgic for the pre-Star Wars George Lucas era? Like Andor had a thrilling 4-episode arc that was inspired by George Lucas's first feature, THX 1138. Now that movie featured a dystopian reality where humans wore white jumpsuits and were forced into labor by a machine-like voice to create machines, and Andor's prison storyline neatly replicated most of these points. Then, in the last episode of The Bad Batch, we had a racing hangout episode that was heavily inspired by Lucas's breakout hit, American Graffiti. And in this episode, we got several callbacks to another Lucas creation, Indiana Jones. Or what's wrong with all that? Nothing, I think it's great. George Lucas was demonized by fans for making the prequels, and I think that he should be celebrated for being a technical pioneer and a creative genius.
And also, he showed us the importance of securing merchandising rights.
That's right. He was a very savvy businessman who was a bit shameless about turning his art into a product.
It's just terrible. It's like people only do things because they get paid.
I know, right? High five. Alright, so let's talk about this episode. So this is a good old-fashioned treasure hunt in the spirit of stories like Treasure Island, The Secret of the Incas, The Goonies, and of course all 3.5 Indiana Jones films. One trope of this genre is the inciting artifact. This is the object that gets the characters to chase the treasure, like the map in The Goonies, the Grail diary in The Last Crusade. You get the idea. And here, it's the compass that Omega finds in the junkyard. It's also neat that Omega begins the episode looking for ship parts, since we saw her becoming an expert in starships in the first episode. Specifically, they're looking for a new compressor. You know, like the faulty one in the Millennium Falcon.
I bypassed the compressor.
But instead, she finds a compass, and this is not the first one that we've seen in Star Wars. In the game Battlefront, you go on a mission with Luke Skywalker to help recover a Jedi star compass. Presumably, Luke used this compass to find the first Jedi temple on Ahch-To, because we see it in The Last Jedi right here. There's also a neat symmetry to the episode that we begin surrounded by junk and wreckage, and we end with the mecha monster becoming junk and wreckage. Back at Sid's, we're reintroduced to Wanda Sykes' character, a treasure hunter / pirate named Phee. Wanda Sykes, if you're unfamiliar, is a brilliant stand-up comic who is one of the best recurring cast members on Curb Your Enthusiasm.
You have a racist dog. That dog hates black people.
Sykes' voice is so distinct that it's really hard to separate her from her Star Wars character, and in my head, this whole episode is a Star Wars adventure, which also happens to feature the woman who did this.
So what, the black man in a suit parks cars, black man no suit, he gonna steal your car.
She starts off at the bar telling her story to Ketch and Bolo, the Ithorian and Weequay regulars who are kind of like Sid's Cliff and Norm.
Who's Cliff and Norm?
From Cheers, the sitcom they were on with Rhea Perlman, who voices Sid.
Family recipe. We call it leap into an open grave.
She's telling the boys a story that is probably half made up. Certainly none of the people and places that she references have ever appeared in Star Wars before.
I swam to the coral cave. And do you know what I found? Only the grand pearl of Novak.
Hunter, Tech, and Echo listen to her, and remember, Tech is starting to distrust Sid after the past few episodes.
This is not the first time she has required our assistance due to her dealings with individuals of questionable integrity.
So he's becoming dubious of Sid and of her contacts like Phee. By the way, the Aurbest on the wall here reads Best in the Mid-Rim. That's the part of the galaxy where Ord Mantell is, and this machine reads Credit Pusher. I assume it's one of those games that's always threatening to push coins over the edge but never quite pays off. So later on, they do find this real treasure that is very, very ancient. Now this is foreshadowed with what Phee says.
One from long before our time.
But I'm going to talk about the ancient history of Star Wars and how all of this foreshadows the Death Star in just a bit. Echo mentions that the batch failed the last time they went treasure hunting, which was when they went after Dooku's treasure in the first 2 episodes of the season. Phee says that's because she was not with them, but remember, she was the one who tipped them off about that caper to begin with. So in her story, she mentions a beast called the Octomorph.
I felt his tentacles wrap around my legs, pulling me down into the depths.
This might be a reach, but I think this is an Easter egg to the Goonies.
But there was no octopus in the Goonies.
No, but there is a deleted scene where the gang fights an octopus, and that is mentioned in the movie.
The octopus was very scary. Yeah, it was very dangerous.
And just like that scene is deleted from the movie, we don't see the octomorph in this episode. There's other Goonies references that I'm going to mention later on. So Phee recognizes the compass right away, and they head off to the Kaldar trinary system, and this is the first time this has been mentioned in Star Wars, for reasons that I'll explain in a bit. But first, can we just take in how gorgeous this animation is? I mean, look at how well that background pops off the screen. It almost looks like live action. Alright, so Kaldar is of course desolate, and this whole scene outside the mountain gate gave me real Mines of Moria vibes. The Fellowship is stuck outside a mountain, has to solve a puzzle to get in, and there's a creature lurking nearby that follows them on their journey. Now the creature is an interesting touch because at first we think it might be working for a monster that's inside, like Smaug guarding the treasure of the Lonely Mountain, but instead the mountain itself is the monster.
Yeah, what's up with that anyways?
Ooh, I got a theory I can't wait to tell you. Alright, so Tex sees the etchings and says,
These etchings are easily 1,000 years old.
and Phee responds,
Older.
after Wrecker says it must be a Jedi artifact, she says,
No. Older.
Jeez, what came before the Jedi?
oh man, you have no idea. So the history of Star Wars goes back like 250 million years. So the earliest life in the universe was when the midi-chlorians emerged from the wellspring of life, which Yoda explored in a Clone Wars episode.
What is this place?
All that surrounds us is the foundation of life, the birthplace of what Jewish science calls midichlorians.
And soon after, these three beings called the Father, the Brother, and the Sister were born, and they were the embodiments of the balance between the Force and the dark and the good sides. Then, like 100,000 years in the past, Coruscant was founded, and sometime around then, people started to invent hyperspace by watching these space whales called the Purrgil that actually have a natural ability to travel through hyperspace. So this led to the creation of the Old Galactic Republic about 25,000 years before A New Hope. Now, this is also around the time of the first recorded Force users.
Oh, the Jedi.
No, the first Force users were actually called the Bendu, and we meet one of them in Star Wars Rebels.
Jedi and Sith wield the Ashlar and Bogan, the light and the dark. I'm the one in the middle.
Soon after, a person called the Prime Jedi did found the Order and build the temple on Act 2 that we saw in Last Jedi. In fact, you can actually see the Prime Jedi in this mosaic here.
But Phee said the temple was older than the Jedi.
Yeah, she might be right, or she might have been wrong. We do see that she's full of it a lot of the time.
This story changes every time she tells it.
But there is evidence that this place was either made by a Sith or the original dark side users of the galaxy that I'm going to talk about in just a bit. But first, more Easter eggs. Phee talks about how this place is called Skara Nal, and that the treasure is at the heart of the mountain, which turns out to be true because the activation key is at the heart of this mechanized beast. So right away, they have to solve this puzzle that is straight out of treasure stories like Tomb Raider and the Goonies. In fact, aligning the proper shapes through a compass is very reminiscent of the Goonies when a medallion aligns with rocks to show the exact location of One-Eyed Willie's treasure. Rise of Skywalker played homage to this in its most famous scene.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Sorry, I meant this scene, the Sith dagger like aligning with the mountains, all that stuff. And having to choose the proper sequence of the markings is a trope featured in like every video game ever, but it's also a lot like one scene in the Goonies where one character has to hit the right notes on a piano to open a gateway. And as Omega solves the puzzle, Kevin Kiner's score goes full on Indiana Jones. So this is the third episode in a row where he has composed a completely different style score. We have the haunting Philip Glass-esque solitary clone, the techno racing episode Faster, and now this kind of epic Raiders of the Lost Ark homage. Booby traps and fall-away floors are another trope made famous by Indiana Jones, and the tunnels that Hunter, Wrecker, and Tech walk through are very much lifted from Temple of Doom. And the breakaway floor is lifted straight from The Last Crusade. In that movie, they have to step on the letters that spell out the name of God in Hebrew in order to pass. In this episode, only the people with the compass can know the true path. Around this time, Phee does another treasure name drop.
This reminds me of the time I tracked down the Belmont diadem.
Alright, so a diadem is an archaic word for a crown, and I think that Belmont might be a cheeky reference to another whip-wielding hero, Simon Belmont from Castlevania.
That'll be a snap. That wasn't the kind of snap I had in mind.
Newer versions of that game also have you solve puzzles like the ones featured in this episode. Now, on a character level, Omega is really the crux of the show. In the first episode this season, most of the conflict stems from her desire to not be a burden. In the past 2 episodes, she's the person who yes-ands the older women and leads the team into an adventure. For her entire life, remember, Nala Se was like the only mother figure she had. And now that Nala Se is off cloning the Emperor, Omega is searching out other maternal figures to offset the testosterone of the Bad Batch. First it was Sid in the last episode, then Phee in this episode. episode. So the last obstacle before the heart of the mountain is a big cavern, which was also from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when Indy has to cross a pit to reach the Holy Grail. So the heart of the mountain is a giant crystal, and as soon as Phee says,
A rare crystalline stone.
I thought, hey, are they going to be doing the Crystal Skull? And then they did the Crystal Skull. So Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull ends with Indy placing an alien skull on a body and activating a spaceship. Here, they remove the object to activate this weapon. So this crystal led me into a couple of theories about what the heck this thing actually is and how long it's been there. In the trailer for The Bad Batch Season 2, we all thought this was another Zillo Beast, like the one that we saw in Clone Wars. The Zillo Beast had a hide that was impervious to lightsabers, and it stomped around Coruscant for an episode of the Clone Wars. But it is interesting that the Zillo Beast's hide was specifically immune to lightsabers, almost like it was maybe genetically engineered to fight Jedi. And I think that this creature might also have a connection to the Jedi, or even to the predecessors of the Jedi, the Bendu. So here's what we know from tech.
I have run a preliminary analysis of the minerals in those stone slabs. They predate the Republic.
But the question is, what Republic is he talking about?
Geez, there's more than one.
There are at least 3 galactic republics. There's the New Republic that Mon Mothma formed after Return of the Jedi, you know, this one.
What you say?
And then there's the Republic that predated the Empire, which was around for about 1,000 years. But then there was also the Old Republic, which was around for about 20,000 years before that. That Republic fell 1,000 years before the prequels, when the Jedi Temple was sacked by the Mandalorians. So this is why Palpatine said,
I will not let this Republic that has stood for 1,000 years be split in two.
But also, Obi-Wan can say,
For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic.
Because the Jedi protected the Old Republic for at least 20,000 years. So no telling what tech exactly means by the age of these stones, but it does give us some clues, and I got 2 theories. One, that this was an ancient Sith superweapon. The Sith were formed 7,000 years ago when a group of Jedi started to use the dark side and were exiled to a planet called Moraband. Now this started a war with the Jedi called the 100 Years of Darkness. Anyways, in an unfinished Clone Wars episode, they confirmed that these Sith, these ancient Sith, created super weapons.
Long ago, in forgotten times, when the Sith and Jedi fought for control of the galaxy, weapons there were of unimaginable power.
So it's not like Palpatine got the idea for the Death Star. He was just copying the ancient Sith.
Exactly. Now, as for this crystal, it could be a very ancient kind of kyber crystal. That's the energy crystal that focuses a Jedi's lightsaber beam, but also that powered the Death Star and Palpatine's Sith Fleet super lasers. Except this crystal is a little more similar to the kyber crystal from Lucas's original Star Wars screenplay, The Star Wars, which had the power to intensify the Force 100-fold. Anyways, if this really was an early Sith weapon, then it would explain why the crystal wasn't fractured and turned red, because they're still using technology that is more from the Jedi era. Or maybe instead of this being a Sith weapon, it was actually a Jedi weapon. Imagine for a second that the Zillo monsters were created by the Sith to be immune to Jedi's lightsabers, and then the Jedi in retaliation created this beast, which obviously went out of control and destroyed a world, so they left it there for all time so nobody could ever access this evil again. But I think it's even more likely that this weapon predates the Jedi and was used by the Bendu or one of their foes. Now, like I said earlier, the Bendu were these beings that didn't really use the dark side or the good side, they just kind of were of the Force. So it's possible still that they had enemies that opposed them, enemies that we haven't seen in Star Wars, who had to build these enormous weapons to fight them off. After the Bendu were victorious, they instructed the Prime Jedi in the ways of the Force, and then they retreated underground. Now, we also know this mecha monster was never defeated because it succeeded in destroying all life on the planet, except for that one random monster. But there's another reason I think this could be an ancient Sith weapon, because the way the mecha is activated is also similar to how a mountain on the world of Malachor was secretly a Sith battle station.
My apprentice is activating the temple, or more precisely, this battle station.
And this monster is a lot of fun. The way it's woken up and then charges its laser also seems like an homage to the Iron Giant. In that movie, an alien robot does not realize that it's a weapon at first, but when it does activate, the cannons charge up and shoot these powerful lasers that like melt everything in its path. Brilliant movie, you should really see it. And after the monster is shut down, Phee says,
I have a lead on a certain chalice.
Another nod to Indiana Jones and his quest for the Holy Grail in The Last Crusade. Now, this episode has a lot of these Indiana Jones Easter eggs, but it also captures the spirit of those movies, because the heroes don't get the treasure. Like, Indiana Jones never gets to keep the treasure at all.
Again, we see there is nothing you can possess which I cannot take away.
Even after all the adventures, every Indiana Jones movie ends with him gaining some greater treasure, like a better relationship with his dad, or, you know, a wife and child. In the same way, the Batch have bonded with Phee Genoa, and maybe, if they're there's some kind of conflict brewing between them and Sid, then Phee's friendship will play a key role. Well guys, that's all the Easter eggs I found, but if you found any, let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.